All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rem Chats, second Friday edition. This is about world building and being creative. And this month, we're going to talk about the idea of the question is, what influences you in the work you're currently doing, the work you've done, and the work you will do? I like to preface this conversation before we introduce everyone with a little disclaimer. A reminder that nothing we make is in a vacuum. From the worlds of Neil Gaiman being influenced by his friend and fellow author Terry Pratchett, to a show like Community that does parodies of old Western films with paintball. And of course, the big one is without samurai films, we don't get Star Wars. So the idea of when you start being creative, a lot of pressure to be original can actually kind of inhibit you from experiencing and becoming a better writer itself. And so, bearing in mind that nothing we make is in a vacuum, we're going to start off with introductions. And I ask people introducing themselves to think about three or four people that you enjoy that have influenced your work. And I will go first. I am John McDonald. I play Panabon on Sunday nights. I play Zordon in the Alternate Archive for the upcoming Power Rangers TTRPG. If you were listening to the Rules of Cool interview from yesterday, I am the person that got the shout out from Sarah. So that means Brian Steele knows me tangentially, and that's just amazing. I also have a couple of podcasts that I do. One is a pop culture, everything is gay, even the straight stuff, where I look at stuff in pop culture. The other one is my sci-fi horror audio drama based on Ray Bradbury and Welcome to Night Vale, Surf City Donuts, as well as this week I have released my first gay visual novel video game on itch, and I'm very excited and terrified because it's a new medium and it's something I've been working on for a whole year. So it's very exciting and very terrifying at the same time. Um, so I decided because I have a lot of influences, so I'm going to use my Halloween influences because we are now officially in autumn. Thank the Lord. And so my kind of autumnal influences are Edgar Allan Poe, uh, International Film Studios, which is the studio that did all the Vincent Price movies. And then I'm going to cheat. My third one is the people that made Little Shop of Horrors possible. So that would be Jim Henson in my mind and Howard Ashman slash I've forgotten the name of the other person. Anyways, Howard Ashman, who did The Little Mermaid, was part of that. And that influences me as a queer artist as well. So that is me. Hello. I will just go round as I see it. Ava, hello. Welcome. Welcome to the chat.
Thank you. So I'm Ava Rogers. If you've been around Rem, you've probably seen me. Monday nights I play Adrian for the Paranormal Albany Dresden Files game. I edit the Alternia Archives podcast and am the GM for the game that is currently releasing, the Aliens RPG. You'll want to stick around and listen to that one because we've got big things coming up around Halloween. There will be 3 extra episodes the days
And
leading up to Halloween.
that official title is Tales of Asteria, right? That's the official title for that.
Yes, Tales of the Asteria.
Yes. Uh, yes.
And I'm also the crowdfunding director for Rem Alternus, which means all the Kickstarters you see us talking about here recently, the Gelatinous Cubes, Coddlesworth, which just ended, the Shadowrun Edge Zone, and the upcoming relaunch of Nocturne by Night. I'm behind all of those. I do the work. A lot of the graphics you see on the Kickstarter page are me because apparently my job involves graphic art now. Didn't know that going in, but they seem to like it. So anyway, I've been writing since I could, um, and it's hard for me to list influences, mostly because it depends on what media I'm currently taking in. My long term or short term rather recollection of names is terrible. So the one big one for me right now is of course Brandon Sanderson. His world building is amazing, as is his magic systems, which is what I take a lot um, from. But the one that got me started, one of my original like fantasy writers that all of mine are writers because that's the names I can remember. Was actually R.A. Salvatore, so a lot of the Faerun stuff. His Legends of Dritz was big for me. Not anymore. I haven't read like the last 5, but and then I'm gonna kind of cheat for the third one because Mark Rosenfelder's Planet Construction Kit. I mean, it's on world building straight up from the solar system, the physics of the world, magic, the different societies, and he's put some of his own worlds in there as examples. And I kind of took one of those and might have used a lot of inspiration from that for one of the cultures I'm currently creating.
I wonder how that book compares to. So my guide when I do world building that I pass along when I teach world building is I use Eleanor Fuchs' Guide to a Small Planet, which is a free PDF that you can find just online. I think it's Visit to a Small Planet Guide. It's Eleanor Fuchs, ELINORFUCHS, and it was made for more people that do playwriting like me. But it has that kind of heft to it, which is really great. Uh, I'd also love to know for your influences because you're running. I don't know if it's based on aliens in general or the Alien movies, but what was your influence behind Tales of Asteria?
So I'm using the Alien RPG rule set by Free League. And I'd listened to a couple one shots. I'd ran one of their scenarios before, played in one of their scenarios before, and I mean, I really liked it. And I did the math, and I had like, okay, I could do 13 episodes, and then Halloween, and so I had it all planned out. And I was like, I'm gonna do aliens. It's gonna end on Halloween. And honestly, that's gotten way out of hand. I'm not sure where the influence came from anymore. To be honest, I kind of started with a pretty, I think, typical sort of cliche. Okay, crew mutinies, and because it's outer space, they toss the captain out the airlock. And then I started that first session with why. What happened that you guys mutinied? And then it's kind of everything snowballed from there.
Okay. It kind of does sound like the Alien movie, and you're just the Ripley of the crew, which is great.
So the way
Yeah.
Aliens, I really like Aliens because it's got 2 play modes. This is completely off topic from the conversation tonight. But so there's the campaign mode, which you typically won't see any xenomorphs in because it's the less deadly, it's the more typical TTRPG playstyle. And then there's the cinematic, which is the big, it's even structured into 3 acts like the movies. That's to be like the movies, it's really supposed to be deadly. And so I've got, I can't remember anymore, 12 or 13 episodes that are just the normal campaign play. And then the last 3 episodes, which are going to release the Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday of Halloween, are going to be that 3-act big final, everybody's probably going to die episodes.
We have a lot of that in Alternia archives. It
Yes.
also does sound, and we can put a hat on this because I want to make sure Xangpow gets a chance to ensure themselves. But the idea of this kind of aliens RPG, the idea of mutiny, it goes back to like old pirate films, because a lot of pirate films have that. So that's a lot of very like pirate open sea sort of stuff, which is really cool. But Zangpal, you're also here, and I want you to give a chance to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so sorry, it just happened. It wouldn't happen when I could have been muted. It happened right when you put me on the spot.
As long as you don't die, that's the important thing. At least not before the 31st, because then having a zombie on stream would be pretty cool, if you ask me.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Zing Pal. I'm just a player. Like you probably saw me playing a Shadowrun game on here before. Haven't really done too much online. I'm just kind of the offline person doing stuff. And you asked for people, I came, so here I am. But
You've also done the you did the first episode of the trivia night, which is going to be a new
oh, that's
thing.
right, that's
So
right, that's right.
yeah,
I did do
it was a
that.
lot of fun. I hope you can come to the next one. But yeah, any creative is welcome to these. You don't have to feel the pressure of being like someone that actually puts stuff out in the world. Because as a player, it's all narrative storytelling. So players are without players, our stories go nowhere. um, and you still have influences of a whole bunch of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking about like when at the beginning of the week when the call was put out, I was thinking about the influences that I had, the things that inspired me, and then I heard that y'all were talking about people, and I was like, I don't really have people per se. I have it's for me, it's more like a genre or a franchise that just is amazing, and I'm just like, that's so cool. What can I do? Where can I play in this world? So like, I think the biggest one would probably for me would probably be Star Wars. Is like the big number one for me. Um, and then I'd probably say like I'm gonna say high fantasy because to say Lord of the Rings is kind of unfair because like while I knew about Lord of the Rings, like my uncle did tell me about Lord of the Rings. It was very highbrow for me. So for me, growing up, it was more Dungeons and Dragons or King Arthur or Robin Hood. And then as I got older, I got into Lord of the Rings, and then Blizzard Entertainment came out with World of Warcraft. And so for me, it's not really a certain well, I just forgot the word. It's not a certain franchise. It's more of the fantasy setting that is just so amazing. I'm just like, this is cool. This whole setting is cool. How can I be part of this setting?
No, I
So,
love that because without Robin Hood, the original Robin Hood, we don't get Robin Hood Men in Tights. We don't get Robin Hood with Kevin Costner as Prince of Thieves. We don't get Disney's Robin Hood, which has the Fox Robin Hood. So it's very valid to say that a genre or something influences what you do, because like for Halloween, I don't watch all horror movies. I tend to watch found footage and haunted house movies more than I go out and look for like a Rob Zombie type of film. And for some people, Rob Zombie is really important to their horror based experience because of how he creates mythology, or they like that kind of rock and roll horror. So, no, yeah, a genre is it's very applicable to the idea of influence because it can be a whole genre. Like I say when I talk about Star Wars, we don't get Star Wars without the genre of the black and white samurai movie. George Lucas is very explicit about that. We can kind of kick off the questions from there. So when you build, say, a character or look in a world, we'll use Star Wars as an example, and we'll start kind of with you, Xangpow. How does Star Wars kind of influence how you either build a character or how you kind of come into a tabletop game, I guess.
um, I will say like my biggest project that I've ever took hold of, I guess you could say, of is when I was in Iraq, but I was deployed to Iraq, and it was about the same time as the video game Star Wars Galaxies was out, and I had been playing that game for a long time before I got deployed. And when I got deployed, I was kind of depressed because I couldn't play my game. I was in the middle of this. I had so many ideas of what I wanted to do with this game. Now I can't do it because I'm in Iraq. And then I said, you know what? I need to do something else. I can't play the game, but I know the storyline. I know everything because I had characters. I had multiple characters. And then I thought, you know what? Why not tell a story? what if I were to take all 12 of my characters and just tell a story? And so, like, for the characters were different because, like, when I made them in the game, they there was a certain theme that I was looking for. So, like, there was one that was going to start off as being just a rough and tumble person, and that does a lot of martial arts, a lot of unarmed combat. That will, as the story went on, turns out that she's force sensitive, and then I was just like, oh hey, she's force sensitive. So what's going on with this? And so there is like I'm still in the process of wanting to bring up the book, so I don't really want to say the entire story. But there is a part where she kind of realizes, hey, you know what? I might be a Jedi, and so there is that. Then there is a
So there's a
what's that?
so there's a part of so when you do something with Star Wars, there's a part of it that for you, yes, it is about the Jedi experience, but it's also kind of about that rough and tumbleness of space. It sounds like one of the ways Star Wars influences characters in your work is that kind of not a Han Solo-ish aspect because I don't know if people consider him a rough and tumble character, but the idea of more of a Tatooine, less of a Naboo, so more of like a rural, scuffy sort of feel.
I think it would be more now that you say it like that. It's more of a Star Wars story or more of a Han Solo story. But what if Han Solo was force sensitive? You know, and
Yeah,
then how does the story, because with my story I wanted to make sure that with my story has nothing to do with the original trilogy. My story is here's what else is going on, so that people, because that was one thing that I've often thought about, like since I was a kid, is these three movies are great, I love them, but what else is there? What else is going on in the universe? Because this is a universe. So there's a lot of stuff going on. This isn't the only thing going on. What else is going on? So I thought, you
yeah.
know, what if there was a Han Solo-ish character? uh, what if they became force sensitive? How does Han Solo handle the fact that I might be a Jedi, but I don't believe in the Jedi? You know?
It's a big universe too. The 30 years of extended universe books, which are thematically interesting. But yeah, so I really like that as an answer. So Ava, how about you? I know it's a big question. You've had a little bit of time to think about your answer for the idea of, you know, just pick one of the things that inspires in your work, and you can use a world building book if you want to. It's not cheating; it's world building.
So that's a very it is a very difficult one to answer because everything depends on the specifics of what I'm currently working on. Like if it's a TTRPG character that I'm making, um, and say I know the system, like I'm making a D&D character. Those I'm more likely to go to the classes that I like and then build from there, build the character from there, who, why, what, and think about how they became the way they were or are.
Hmm.
If it's something, if it's
Well, let's take an example. How about when you were building? I always get your name wrong for your character. Casair. I can never remember if
because
it's a hard. I can
I
never
think
remember if it's a K or a C. I'm supposed to pronounce it as. That's why I try not to.
yeah, we pronounce it as a hard K sound on the show, but I think the actual pronunciation is more Cessair, as because it's an Irish name. But for her, so with that one, I didn't really know much about the Dresden Files series. Like I hadn't read the books. I knew vaguely what the setting was, what the genre was, and so I knew the kind of tropes it was pulling on. And so for Casair, I specifically went for the mundane who um doesn't know anything about the magic society, the magic side of the world, thinks it's all fairy tales. But and then I went with bookie nerd because that's what I am. So and the Irish was just because I had started doing an Irish accent for a voice acting thing. And it was terrible. Don't listen to those first episodes like ever. It's so
Or
bad.
do and take notes on how not to do it.
It's gotten so much better over the what 2 years? Two has it? No, it hasn't been. It might have been almost 2 years that I've been playing the character. It's gotten a lot better.
So for like a character like Casair, I'm gonna use the hard K. I'll make that choice.
Yeah,
Uh, would you say because you didn't know Harry Dresden, when you thought of creating this bookish character that either was going to flower or was going to become absolutely evil? Because that's usually the way bookish characters go.
yeah.
Um, did you have like? Did you say I really want to make a Hermione Granger type character, or I really wanted to make an Anita Blake? Or did you like look at the back cover of a Harry Dresden book and go like, Susan, I want to make a Susan. So that's kind of the question here if we want to get down to it.
So I'm not sure that I pulled on any specific character so much as just the tropes of the character type. Like I guess there is a bit of the Hermione in there. Um but I just kind of went with I pulled a lot on just the nerdy librarian tropes, even though she's not technically a librarian, but I pulled on those for a lot of her um initially.
But when you use the word trope, because there are going to be people out there that have heard that word but have never actually like thought about the meaning, what do you mean when you say the word trope?
Right, so the easiest way to describe it is tropes and cliches are basically the same thing, but a trope is when it's done right, a cliche is when it's overused and overplayed. So if you know what a cliche is, a trope is that, but a positive spin on it.
And we're going to talk about parody in a little bit, probably if we get to it. I have a list of questions. We'll see how many we get through. But part of the idea of the things that influence us is also how parody works and when something gets overused. Um, I like to use detective stories for this, and so Harry Dresden is a parody of a detective story with magic. And in that case, you get there are a lot of words for how we look at stuff and decide what parts we're going to take to make new stuff. Essentially,
Yes.
so don't be intimidated by the big words. They exist, but they all just mean how we make new stuff. At the end of the day, um, and for
Yeah, and
me,
so
and
another way, well, I just sorry, another
you
way to
know,
think of a trope, if you say you don't know what a cliche is, you don't know what a trope is, you don't know what any of that those phrases mean, you skip that day in English class. Um, a trope is if you take away the name and the backstory, like right now we're talking about characters. So you take away Hermione's name and her specific backstory, you're left with the descriptor words. She's the nerdy goody two shoes. That's a trope. And well, it becomes a trope when you see it as a part of a genre, when that thing is basically embedded in the genre.
yeah. So like for Xangpow, a part of the trope of Han Solo for you is this like rough and ready, not necessarily Jedi character, but there are some rough and ready Jedi's. But when you think about Han Solo, what kind of tropes do you think Han Solo has, Zing Pao?
Um, I'd probably think like scoundrel, good luck, or not? Is it good luck? Yeah, good luck, scoundrel, um, good heart, hard skin, um, yeah, the typical I guess you could say trope would be uh hard as nails but very soft center.
When I think about Han Solo, I use the term swashbuckler because I always bring it back to kind
Yes.
of that open sea pirate thing. But when I think of Han Solo, I kind of think of him also as the ultimate ace Shadowrun character.
Yes.
Um, like, because he's very charming. Even if he doesn't use all the right words, he's very charming, and you very much want to follow his lead, even though he's not the most powerful man in the universe. So for me, he's very much a Shadowrun face type. If I were to build a face, it would likely be somewhere between him and maybe someone from the Wild Cards anthology, someone like the Father, because the Father from the Wild Cards anthology series is really good. Um, okay, so the next kind of question is we can go a little broader. So we got really into it with Kasser, but now we can kind of go. Let's actually do one of mine. We'll do one of mine. So one of my kind of things that I have is my love for the Little Shop of Horrors. The movie, I haven't seen the stage show because it just hasn't come to where I've lived yet. But when you look at the movie, it's just kind of very strange Faustian bargain, very classic literature, except it's turned on its head. It's got this giant talking bloodthirsty plant that wants to give you everything you wish for. It's a cautionary tale. It's a tale about poverty. There's a lot of different lines into it. It also has a really great kind of R&B rock and roll score to it. So for me, my work tends to have a whimsical feel because something I took out of the musical genre was the idea of whimsy and was the idea of kind of that magical nature of things. Not everything has to be so realistic, not everything has to make as much sense. As long as you take a world on its own terms. So, going from something like when you're building a world, when you're looking at influences, you can look at a specific character, a specific setting, like 1950s inner city, but you can also look at a genre. So I can look at something like the genre of stage musical film. You can look at something like Chicago, you can look at The King and I, you can look at Sound of Music, and you can talk about kind of, for me, there's a fairy tale aspect, there's a structure to them. You mentioned the three-act structure for, by the way, Ava is on my right, so when I'm doing this with my hand, I'm pointing to Ava, but I don't know where Ava is on your screen. Um, but I think a lot about the idea of three-act structure, which is a very traditional way of portraying a story. So I take that of a genre, and the three-act structure. When you watch TV, you're tending to get a 4 or 5 act structure, which is the 3 act structure, but the third act is broken up and the second act is broken up. But it's the idea of when you expect a problem to be introduced and how it is resolved. And we'll have an episode on structure of story. But when you think about genre, you don't just have to get like flavor out of a genre. I could get something out of Star Wars pretty easily. In fact, I tend to get my humor a little bit from the Star Wars Lego games. So in the genre of when I think about Star Wars, I actually think about kind of that off the cuff humor in the stories more than I necessarily do about the stories themselves. Although I have enjoyed some of the extended universe personally. Um, yeah, so let's move out a little bit from personal things. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of how a genre influences you. And what I mean about this, again, when I talked about, I don't know if anyone has seen this actually. So, has anyone seen the TV show Community? Or it's a streaming show now, I guess, because that last season was done on Yahoo.
I
Um,
don't think so.
I have seen an episode,
okay.
and it was the D&D episode.
Oh, that was a good episode, though. So Community was really famous for doing parodies of things, but doing like a loving parody. So they used to do these episodes where they were like Western themed, but they were doing them with paintball. And so they were taking the idea of the shootout, the last stand, the damsel in distress, the kind of instead of having the town, they'd have the corridor of the school, and it's the idea of they took the genre of Western and they put it in this middle town college and they made it paintball. So people died, but they didn't die. And they have a hero archetype and a villain archetype. Rugrats was also really good at this, of doing loving genre things. They actually did a Western episode, which I've used in teaching classes. But let's talk a little bit about kind of influence from genre a little bit. And I'll just go back around with Ava. Fantasy is a really big genre if you want to use fantasy. So you could be like, I'm going to use high fantasy or low fantasy or medium fantasy, whatever kind of fantasy you want to use. We could even talk, because you talked earlier before we started about Brandon Sanderson. You could talk about how um, Stormlight, I think it's Stormlight Archives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how Stormlight Archives has kind of influenced your work if it has.
Actually, the biggest one from Brandon Sanderson that has influenced me was actually the Mistborn trilogy, the first Mistborn trilogy, more so than the second series. I think there was 4 in the second Mistborn. But that could be that it was my introduction to Brandon Sanderson, and so it had a very big impact on me. And I think the way that that's impacted me is seeing, especially with the Mistborn, because I forget what he calls it. The second Mistborn series is like 100 years in the future after the first one, after the first trilogy ends. And so time has moved, the world has evolved, and I mean, they've got gunpowder, and the magic system has kind of faded in that they're less powerful. But I don't know, I watching the setting actually evolve with time. A lot of fantasy seems to really be stagnant. They either, I mean, you look at your high fantasy. You think Lord of the Rings, Brandon Sander or not Brandon Sanderson, but you think Lord of the Rings, R.A. Salvatore, the D&D sort of sword and sorcery is what it's
The
commonly
English
called.
the English sword and sorcery genre.
Yes.
It's really its own genre.
Yeah. And seeing seeing that world differently. I mean, and he pulled from different um it wasn't just England that he pulled from in like the Mistborn series. Those were, I mean, he had like large cities. It took place in mostly a large like capital city, and it was more of a heist set in a fantasy setting. And that blend was really, it felt unique to me. And I mean, it might have been the first one that I've read that blended things so smoothly like that.
So when you say blend, is it the idea of taking different tropes from different genres and then putting them in this one setting? Is it like a Terry Pratchett deal? Is it closer to what you've discovered of Harry Dresden? When you say blend, what do you?
Well, so for the specific example I'm using, Mistborn, there were a couple different twists that he did on tropes. The big bad was a failed hero. The hero, or no, I take it back. The history behind it, the big thing is that the hero went on a long journey in the past, and then right at the end, the bad guy won. And so the world became this dark and dingy place, but it's a fantasy setting. Almost, no, it is dystopic, really. And then you have a heist set in it. At least the first book is mostly it. The first book is a heist. The second two get more into like actual war. But it's just like a heist, like Ocean's 11, but set in this dystopic fantasy setting. And it's just and it felt really natural. Like nothing felt out of place. That you've got a team of thieves in this fantasy setting.
Yeah, I want you to take a moment and actually think about that and kind of how that's influenced your work or the kind of questions it left you with. And I want to go to Xangpow and I want to ask you, because we talked about Han Solo, and I'm just going to let you be the Star Wars person for a little while if you'd like. But what about the Star Wars universe appealed to you? Like, because you ended up not using something like Event Horizon or Babylon 5 or Farscape. why Star Wars? How did that not just influence in the idea of having Jedi, but what about Star Wars specifically really resonated with you?
I was just thinking about that as you were talking, and I think what George Lucas did with Star Wars is what Shadowrun did for Cyberpunk, because you're taking the known thing and you add magic. So you have space, you have technology, you have all this high tech stuff, and you throw in some magic in there, which is called the Force, and that was very much strange, but kind of cool. And I was just like, I liked how in the New Hope you do get this idea of that Luke Skywalker is he's just a kid, and he's just like everybody else, trying to he's wondering what he's going to do when he grows up, and then it turns out that he is actually a special person because he has this magic, and now he's like, what do I do with this magic? So I think that was the one thing that separated for me Star Wars from, I guess at that time, was Star Trek. So it's like Star Wars versus Star Trek is high tech science, and if you can't do it with science, you just can't do it. Whereas with Star Wars, it's high tech, it's science, and if you can't do it with science, there's always the Force. So I thought that was a kind of a neat thing, that there's always a way to do it. Even if you're Force sensitive and you're a Jedi, you can still do it. It's like, well, I can't reach that thing. Well, why not? Because it's too far. My arms can't reach. And use the Force. Like, whoa, that's cool.
So, has any other space series since Star Wars kind of grabbed you in even a similar way? Like when you look at Stargate or Babylon, or not Babylon, Stargate or Sliders, or something where there's technology, but there could also be that feel of magic. Has anything kind of grabbed you in that same way since?
I'd probably say Doctor Who, because like with Doctor Who is very much the high tech, super futuristic. It won't work. Why won't it work? I don't know. It just broke. That's okay. I got my sonic screwdriver.
Except
Everything
it
works with
doesn't
a sonic
do wood.
screwdriver.
No wood setting on a sonic screwdriver.
Yes. You can even recharge an old sonic screwdriver with a screwdriver, so now you can have two sonic screwdrivers. I was just like, this is great. I love this.
All right, I love that. Okay, so Ava, we're gonna come back to you now that I want to give you a second to think about the question that I've already forgotten that I have you thinking about. So I hope you remember what it was.
Well, I remember, and I actually didn't really need any time to think about it. That blending of genres, and I wouldn't even just put that on Brandon Sanderson, because Shadowrun also had quite a big effect on me in that way, because I mean, it's cyberpunk, but then you also have magic and dragons and all of that, and so that is part of what I stuck around Shadowrun, because of that blend. Um, and so in my own works now, I sometimes with my books, I have a hard time putting a genre on it, because there is such a mix of things. I sometimes will default to just calling them contemporary fantasy, because that encompasses everything in the in the fantasy genre. Or no, complete. What's the actual umbrella one? It's
Everything from Gummy Bears to 2001: A Space Odyssey.
speculative
It's contemporary fantasy.
speculative fiction, even, because that's an even higher umbrella. That encompasses everything from your high fantasy to your hard sci-fi, and everything in between. I will sometimes have to default to that. If I set it in a more realistic setting, like the Ribbons of Fate. So anybody who watches Monday Night Adrian, she began as a book character. Or I don't remember which came first, the book or the Dresden. I do know that I had to water down her backstory for Dresden to be able to actually talk about her history on screen. So it's not quite to grimdark, but I just default to contemporary fantasy. Because it's not quite urban fantasy. It doesn't quite have that blend of magic, but there is a taste.
It's kind of the opposite of the magicians, where everything is magic and magic causes all the problems in the universe.
Right.
All right, so now we've done kind of the positive and the inspiration. Now it's kind of time to do the other side of that coin. What is negative and cringe that you avoid, like pants are on fire, in your work that you don't like in your genre? So, like for instance, for me, when I'm writing a play, I'm so heavily influenced by um, for I've lost my train of thought. I get really hung up on the three act structure. So I think about Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. I think about Sound of Music. One of the things that my hero Stephen Sondheim did when he came into theater was he started playing around with that. And so for me, one of the problems that I have is when I'm writing a play or I'm writing something, is not to get stuck in a structure that will keep the story from moving on. So it doesn't have to necessarily be an aesthetic thing. There are some aesthetic things. Um, but when I think about things that can negatively impact my work, um, when I look at monster movies too, there's a lot of racism, sexism, and homophobia in some of those where you watch it now. Like I sat down and I did a whole bunch of horror movies and I watched Stuff, which is kind of a take on the Blob, but instead it's like an ice cream that eats you from the inside out. It's like a frozen yogurt thing, but it has this like weird third act militaristic jingoism is good thing going on that kind of disrupts from the first half of the movie. And so, like, when I'm doing something with monsters or horror, as a person that's queer, as an other, where other and queerness was normally the villain of those stories, I'm very cognizant of that. And that's changing for the better. In fact, there's some queer horror movies. There's one with a serial killer where a guy is dating the serial killer and thinks that it's all kind of this like running joke, which is a really cool one. And there's stuff like Psycho Beach Party, which is like if Scooby Doo, but everyone in Scooby Doo was the villain. That's how I think of Psycho Beach Party. So when I do something like horror or I do sci-fi, I try to be cognizant of things that have come before, because things that have come before so heavily relied on racism, sexism, and homophobia, and even just trying to get out of the boxes of what is deemed evil in these universes is something that I try to be aware of. Um, yeah, and so Xangpow, I'm going to pose the question. You can come back around to Ava. It doesn't have to be Star Wars. Once again, you can talk about Doctor Who. You can talk about any of the other stuff that you like. But like in trying to do this kind of Jedi story that you're either writing or did write, what kind of things do you not bring with you from the universe? Are the Jedi just way too uptight for you, for instance?
Um, I think one thing is one thing I would not put into the story, if we're just going to focus on that one story, is not being too detailed. In by that I mean, like one author I did like to read it a lot was Tom Clancy. But one thing that I don't like about him is that he goes into so much detail of the ships and the soldiers and the tanks. Like there was, I think it's in Hunt for Red October, that there is a story that he tells of the father of one of the workers that worked for the Hunt for Red October, and that the father was actually the son of an uncle that was in the Second World War, and he was a hero. And I'm just like, okay, cool story, but what does it have to do with this? with this story. So I think like for my story, I wouldn't be go too deep into all that, and just keep a lot of stuff open, I guess you could say. And like if somebody were to actually read the book and be like, well, what about this? Couldn't they have done this and this and this? It's like, yeah, maybe, but that wouldn't make a good story. So that I think one thing that I would not really put is, I guess you could say, excessive details, because like then you get bored with the history of the general's daughter, who actually was, when whatever, and it's like, cool story, but what does it have to do with the story that's being told right now?
Do you
I'm
ever struggle
feeling
with
very
that?
attacked.
I was gonna say, do you ever struggle with that? If as a player, do you ever feel like you ever do that with building a backstory, and then you just have like a 14-page essay about a backstory, and most of it never comes up in play?
Um, I will say yes, because there's quite a few D&D characters that I do have like 4 pages of backstory, and then you kind of read it. It's like, well, why is it 4 pages? It's like, well,
Because I didn't
because
have time for 40.
yeah, because the thing is that you start with a backstory. Well, this person was actually dropped off at a chapel and then became this great hero. Okay, so why were they dropped off? Well, they were dropped off because of this. Okay, but what happens then? Like, what kind of person were they as a kid? And it was just like, okay, well, you kind of come up with a lot of these questions that other people might ask, and then you end up with this really great story. It's like, um, can we cut any of this out? It's like, I mean, if we cut anything out, then you're just left with, they were left on the doorstep of a chapel. So it's like, you kind of need the 4 pages, otherwise it's just, they were left on the doorstep of a chapel.
Yeah, and that's kind of a difference too, between a player and a GM. I don't know if you've actually gotten to GM or if you've just done playing, but there's a difference in how you do that backstory and how you write something as a GM, where you're desperately trying to be in control of the universe, versus as a player where it's just a small corner of the universe. It's a very different experience. I don't know if you've experienced that.
I Not really, because like I was kind of forced into GM a game because like I was. It was funny because it was 4 players. We were supposed to have a GM. The GM never showed up, and they're like, "Well, if you don't have a GM, you can't play." So I was like, "I guess I'll be the GM so that we can play." So I'm not really sure if that actually counts. Like I had zero preparation.
It does count in some, but sometimes you're just drafted, even if it's by happy choice. Sometimes you just get drafted into it, and that's okay. Um, so, so Ava, negatives in the genre, any genre that you like in high fantasy, what bothers you? Like, are you one of those people that absolutely hates Tom Bombadil from the Lord of the Rings because you
I
think it
love
breaks
Tom
up the pacing?
Bombadil.
No, I love
I
Tom, but it's
love
like a
Tom
thing.
Bombadil. I
It's
know
like
it's a
the
thing and he should have been in the movie.
Like,
I will
it's like the
stand
people
by
that are
that.
like, it's like the people that are like, you can't have a lamppost in Narnia because it doesn't make sense. That's not the point of the story. But that is a thing people say. So like, what is kind of like your negative in the genre sort of thing?
Okay, so I've got for a couple. So I'm gonna 2 separate genres. um, so looking at like your fantasy, your high fantasy, less contemporary, more high fantasy, sword and sorcery, that whole flavor of fantasy. Um, like I've been working on a fantasy world for a while, building it, and not making much progress because I don't have time to sit down and work on it. But setting that aside, in building it, I'm very intentionally staying away from the kings lording over the European fantasy, the kings and knights and all of that.
There are no round tables in your books? None at
I
all?
mean, there might be, but not like King Arthur's round table.
People still gotta eat.
And I tend to try and stick away from the default patriarchal society. Of the two that I've started defining more clearly, one is a matriarchal society where women have multiple husbands. Because and I have the reason for that, because they tend to have large births. Like their average size of, I can't think of a word that's not,
Cassowary?
the average size of their brood is between 3 and 6 at one time. And so more men in a family group is necessary to care for all of those children, because more women mean more births. And so you get a matriarchal society. The other one puts even less definition based, less importance on the sex or gender, and more on which of their two main gods you choose to venerate. And I'm still working on that society, because childbirth and would be interesting because they don't care the gender of the person that you just marry, but that you are of the two different gods, because two parts of a whole, that whole thing. So I try to stay away from the typical patriarchy, but I do it intentionally. Some societies might be patriarchal. I just haven't gotten there yet. I've only done 2.
So it's somewhere between Hedwig and Clan of the Cave Bear, but just the parts where she's on her own.
I'm not familiar.
Okay, that's fine.
But I came across a thread on Twitter recently that made me stop and think, because a lot of like the cyberpunk genre and the sci-fi genre of that, it's also very white and very cis. Even Cyberpunk 2077, you've got your couple standouts, but a lot of it's still, and
there aren't
you've
a
got,
lot of black heroes in space, sadly.
right,
Like,
and I mean you've got, it's sad, it's actually kind of sad to me that it's considered a separate genre, the Afrofuturism, because like that's just sci-fi. It just doesn't have a white central focus. And you've got, I mean, Coyote and Crow looked great. I haven't gotten my hands on that. I think they did another Kickstarter recently, but it was Native American based. And I think it was in the cyberpunk genre, or getting close to that. I know it was futury. I'm pretty sure cyberpunk, and it looked great. But they're the outliers. And so when I'm doing my I have a cyberpunk setting I've been working on, that's similar to Shadowrun in that it mixes magic, but it's very intentionally done different. It started a Shadowrun setting, and then I was like, wait, I can't actually publish a Shadowrun novel because at the time, I didn't even know anybody who worked for Catalyst. So I took another setting of mine that just was more contemporary, and then adding magic. And so I said, okay, that happened in the past in this setting, and now we're in the future, and made it all one setting. So it's very intentionally different.
okay, let's do. So we're coming up on the end of the first hour. Does anyone need a 5-minute break, or do we want to just press on through? Because I'm okay to press, but I want to make sure you get a break if you need it.
I'm good.
I think I'm okay.
So let's do the flip side of that. From the negative back to the positive. What do you absolutely essentially need in your universe for it to be what you consider either a genre work or personally? So for me, when I'm doing like something with the Vincent Price and Edgar Allan Poe, I kind of need that romantic Celine Dion esque castle, Wuthering Heights fog, lots of billowing wind. I need candles. You don't find a lot of my more romantic gothic stories taking place where there's electric light unless it has a reason to be there. I know some people that love to do gothic romanticism, but they do it in the future. And we start talking about things like parody and new versions of genre, that's where it starts to go. But like when I think about if I'm going to write a horror movie, unless I'm specifically writing like a Blair Witch Project found footage and I need to be in a grubby basement, I go really kind of shockingly beautiful. I go a little bit into that neon demon Suspiria headspace, the 70s Suspiria. Um, where even when it's gory, it has sort of this beautiful, fantastic quality to it. And so, like for me in a genre, when I'm thinking about, there was a really great Edgar Allan Poe animated series that Shudder just put out called Extraordinary Tales, and each of the five different tales is done in a different style. One of them is like comic book, one of them has like a wood grain feel. And so for me, it's a lot about kind of the beauty and the ornateness, and even in some ways about the acceptance of death. When I think about one of my favorite films growing up that I should not have been allowed to watch as a child, which is not Return to Oz, which I also should have not been allowed to watch as a child. But when I think about I think it's from '77, I could be wrong on that year, but the Vincent Price Mask of Red Death, with all the Dutch angles, everyone at the party having the bacchanal at the end before they all die of the Red Death, because that's what the book is about. Um, it's there's this feel of opulence and chaos and frenetic energy, and they go from being this like really having a gay party essentially into becoming zombies in a way. Zombies that don't eat brains, but zombies dying of this red plague and like this kind of Jesus-y punishment sort of thing. Hoisted by their own petard, I believe the term is called. So for me, when I think about a horror genre, unless I definitely need it to be gritty, I kind of like that lushness. I like the beauty. I like kind of the juxtaposition of the frightening with the kind of, I guess, sexy, for lack of better terminology. Um, Ava, what do you think? What would you absolutely need for it to be like fulfilling? What in your heart yearns in those genres? What do you really need?
So, this is probably a slightly different take on the question than you had intended, but because I write such a wide range of genre, like I write all over the speculative fiction umbrella, high fantasy, science fiction, everything in between. So, for me personally, and this is going to sound like a really obvious answer, but it's character. And it's not like just a character, a person that you're writing about, but and this has changed as I've grown as a writer. You look at high fantasy and you think like Lord of the Rings, and you've got big world-ending consequences of failure. But anymore, I find I get a lot smaller in my stories, and I get really close to the main character and who they are, what they're about, and they have to be a interesting and b I guess that's just buckling down into what plot is. They have to have a problem, something they want, and they can't get it because of the problem. Anyway, that's just plot. But it has to be about a character. And if I can't find that character, that voice, that person that is at the heart of it, I can't write it.
So instead of like a generic gangster mob heist movie, you need something like Ocean's 8 is the one that I prefer. Or you need like The Mask with Jim Carrey and Cameron Diaz instead of like a where it has a bit more vitality and it's not just about the idea of like a gangster. but it's more like the people inside of it. No, that's a very fair answer.
Yeah.
You need characters to make the story work. It's not just something you need for D&D. You really need it for everything you do.
I mean, there's an interesting question there because there have been normally short stories. You don't normally get novel lengths out of something that doesn't have like a character, or some people have done like the setting as the character. Oh my goodness, I read a really good short story where the house was the character.
Was it the Ray Bradbury "There Will Come Soft Rains," where it's all of the?
Yes.
It's a really good story. So
Oh, I read it recently and I was like, "Oh my
yeah,
god."
it's there's also a really great one. I don't think Bradbury did it, about where humanity hasn't seen the sun, and people on their honeymoon go to one specific spot on the earth, which is the only place with the sun, and they only see it once in their lives. That's also a really good one. Leviathan 99 as well, one of my favorite Bradbury, and something we could just make up. We could do a whole show on Bradbury, so we're not going to. But I definitely appreciate that answer, and I think it's a very valuable take on the question of what you need. And of course, then I will ask Xangpow, what do you need in your stories for them to fulfill the hole in your soul as a creative?
Yeah, when I was like not really shopping around, but like talking to different people about wanting to publish this book, there was I can't remember. I think it was just one person that was like, "Yeah, this is a good story, and you have a very good book that you are working on, but Star Wars isn't going to let you publish this." And I was just like, "Well, why not? Because this is their universe, and you're borrowing a lot from their universe. You might want to do something on your own. Make this your story." Now it's just like, yeah, that would be a good idea. Once I finish it, I just self-publish it, and this will be my story 100%. So I started going through the process of looking throughout the whole thing, and it's like, okay, well, I was like, how hard can it be? Because since I did make it a point to tell a different story than the original three movies. So I was like, how hard can that be to change things up? And it turns out that there is a different language that the people have to talk about. The different terminology has to be used, because there are certain terms that when you use it, it's like, that's Star Wars. Like if you use the word stormtrooper, I
It's
mean,
copyrighted.
yeah, it's like, hey, that's a Star Wars movie, huh? No, that has nothing to do with Star Wars. And why are you using stormtrooper? Well, that's they're a military people that go by that term. It's like, no, that's a Star Wars movie. So I started going through all that, and then I realized at the very end of the story has to be 100% changed. And I can't tell you why, because you already know the end of the story. But then I was like, well, then now I have to change the ending like completely. And I was like, well, what if I just change a person's name? I come up with a new religion and everything. And I was like, that's going to be a lot of work. That's going to be a lot of work. We're talking world building stuff here. It's like, I'm not looking to world build here. I'm just trying to tell a story. I was like, well, I guess I kind of have to keep it in the Star Wars universe. And then as to the publishing thing, well, let's worry about that later. Let's first finish the book. Let's actually have an actual working book, completely finished, and then we'll worry about publishing. Because the fact is, like, this is something I started back in 03, 05, something like that time, and we are now in 2022. So I'm not sure if I'm ever gonna finish this novel. So I'm starting to think, it's okay to put in the Star Wars universe, because it's probably never gonna get finished anyways.
Well, it's an interesting point too because I started out in my own writing playing other sandboxes. For me, I started doing fan fiction for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That just shows my age a little bit, but so I came at this kind of in the same direction, except I was doing more of that gothic romance, especially doing more queer gothic romance, using Buffy as kind of this manifest. And then I spread out into like, I used to do this really great CSI pairing. I did Oz, the TV show, the prison drama. I was doing Glee for a while. When Glee came out, I did a little bit of Doctor Who and Torchwood. But for me, the idea of fan fiction, I think it's actually a really important part of the process. Most of the things that we love are really fan fictions of other things, or they're parodies of things. You look at something like Rick and Morty, which is a parody of Back to the Future that just got way out of hand, essentially. But it also parodies other things. They've done Terminators, but with snakes. They did Dan Simmons' Hyperion Tree in one episode. So I don't think there's anything wrong with fan fiction. Obviously, to get something published in the universe, you have to have the blessing of the people that own the universe. The question I'm going to have for you to ask is, even though this is an ongoing thing you've been working on since '03, has there been a moment where you realized it was your own work and that even though you were playing in someone else's world, that you felt an ownership, like you felt like this was a story that you were writing and not just like borrowing ideas from the Star Wars people? Like, when was that moment? Was there a moment of ownership for you?
I think at the very beginning, when I started putting everything on, when I'm putting all the details together of, is at the beginning, it's just three characters. It's like, okay, well, what are these, or 12 characters? Well, what are these 12 characters doing? And then once I started actually putting the story together of how to introduce these 12 characters, what are they doing, how are they interacting, when do they meet each other, do they meet each other, when I'm starting doing the outline of the story, I think that's when I realized, you know what, this is my story. And I made sure to make sure that there is no mention of the first three movies. So there is no, like, there might be mention of stormtroopers, there might be mention of Darth Vader, but that's because that's just general knowledge in that universe. Like, in that universe, everybody knows about Darth Vader, everybody knows about stormtroopers. That's common knowledge. But nobody is going to be talking about Luke Skywalker because the only people that know about Luke Skywalker are on Tatooine. In fact, it's only Mos Eisley of the people that know Luke Skywalker. I can probably bet you that people in Mos Espa probably don't know Luke Skywalker. You know, so that was one thing that I was just like, that's probably where I kind of thought that this is my story when I decided that I'm taking out the main plot line of the three movies, but I'm keeping the, I guess say, the general knowledge. I think that was when I was like, this is my story. It's in your sandbox, but it's my sandcastle. You know?
Okay. Ava, I know you're working on like 1,400 different things at the moment, so you'll have to pick one. But have you had that moment of ownership in building a world, and what was that moment like for you, if you've had it?
Um, Perhaps it's my ego.
I mean, as a writer, do you have an ego, kind of thing?
I mean, it comes there right along with the imposter syndrome. So it's a fun.
It's the shadow side of the imposter syndrome is the ego, where you're the best
Yes.
it's ever been.
And sometimes, especially here recently with the world that I've been working on, I keep mentioning, I want to turn it into like a setting to be used in probably Savage Worlds system, just because Savage Worlds is so modular that it could fit. Um, Sometimes when I think about that and how some players that I've had at my table are, I get worried. Like, even better example. So during the streamathon, I played in a game of Misspent Youth. That setting was the one that I created for the most recent Misspent Youth.
I was very excited for you when I heard, and then I saw that you were going to be in that game, and I was like, all right, well, this will be. Did they like have to pick you up off the floor with a spatula after all was said and done? Was it just unintended? Was it just unintended turtles all the way down, as it were?
It wasn't that bad, but I did not expect so for those who might not have been there, I think most everybody in the audience right now is, but if you're watching the video recording afterwards, um the characters are all different. What's the phrase? Anthropomorphized animals, basically, except for there's an elf and a human. And I guess anyway, they're like fantasy races, but without the. I literally just called it a beastkin. And then one was like an avian type, and one was more lizardy, so like a kobold type thing. But anyway, I did not expect, and I never thought I would have to expect for the avian. And I use all gender neutral. They could be any gender. I just use gender neutral all the way down. They could be whatever you want them to be. And Sarah decided that Asan, the avian beastkin, was a female, and decided to make a that time of the month comment, and it's her egg laying time, and I didn't know how to react to that, and it's just kind of like, what have you done to my baby?
What have you done to my character? Oh God!
Yes.
Why?
So I guess that's a bit of the opposite moment, but like, this is mine. What are you doing with it?
That's still ownership. So that kind of leads into the next question. The next question is, of the things you love, what parody or homage have you loved of the things you love? So for me, um, I love some detective movies, some old detective movies like the Thin Man series. So I think of Tiny Toon Adventures doing Constantinople, Istanbul as a Maltese Falcon music video parody as one of those moments I really love. And I also think about something like the Once Upon a Time series and the fabulous Lana Priya as the evil queen that nobody saw coming and that kept that show going for 7 long years. Um, and so when you think about genre, when you think about things you love, do you think about Rick and Morty doing a Terminator Snake parody? Do you think about the Rugrats doing a parody of it? I have other ones. I had one in my head that I wrote down and I can't find, and I promptly forgot that I'm going to feel bad about later. But I'll start. I'll start with Zhangpow and come back up to you, Ava. So do you have Zhangpow? Do you have in either the space genre something like there was a Community spoof of Doctor Who called Inspector Spacetime in the Karen Gillian episode. Um, so like, do you have a parody or homage of something you really love?
I'm thinking. I know you can't see it, but I'm rubbing my beard and I'm thinking.
Those three little dots have appeared below your moon. Like the
Yes,
starlight, the Sailor Moon and Sailor Moon.
it appears, disappears, appears, disappears.
Disappears.
Um, I'm not sure about homage or parody. Cause I mean,
Yeah.
there was I watched there was a movie. Oh, what was that movie called?
So
Can't
like if
remember.
Bob, so like Bob's Burgers did a Blade Runner parody for one of their two-part season finales, which was really cool. And in the I think it's the third episode, they did a Shining parody where Bob gets stuck in the false wall of his apartment building. So things like that. If you can even think of just a cartoon where that worked for you. I thought of mine. Mine was Bob as doing The Shining, doing a full-on Shining was my favorite. So
I mean, I guess the one thing that I didn't really appreciate was oh my goodness, the Family Guy. When Lucasfilms gave him the go ahead, and I think it called Blue Milk,
Blue Harvest. They
Blue
used the
Harvest.
name of
That's right.
they used the code name for Revenge of the Jedi as the name for that. And I think that was the one where they were like, we let the interns write jokes because we were tired and we didn't want to do a third one. Um,
And that
yeah,
was one that if you watch it, and you would never realize that George Lucas or Lucasfilms actually gave him the go ahead to do that because there's so much play on words and there's so much poking fun at the Star Wars universe. It's just like, hey, okay, this. So that was one of those. I was just like, it's cool that Lucasfilms had a sense enough sense of humor to let that go.
that is when parody goes bad. Unlike Bob's Burgers doing a two-part Blade Runner, which is amazing. If you haven't seen the Bob's Burgers season finale where they do the Blade Runner, or their homage to Jaws called The Deepening, where the shark gets killed by a soft serve ice cream machine. It's really something to see. It's a wonder when it's done well. When it's not done well, you get Family Guy doing Star Wars Episode 6. But when it's done well, you get things like Archer, which is kind of in the vein of Bob's Burgers with like H. John Benjamin's voice. Or you get something like The Critic, which has both really good and really bad ideas. You get like The Tick, who's kind of a parody of superheroes, is a really interesting thing, and people either really love or really hate The Tick because they don't get it. And I'm talking about the animated Tick because I'm not sure the Patrick Warburton Tick went deep enough. But you've got things like The Boys, which is also kind of a parody, but also kind of a takedown of superhero. Um, so yeah. Does anyone have any of those for them? You could even talk about like where in the world is Carmen San Diego game show as a parody or homage to the video games that's based on kind of thing.
I think that what's his name? Oh, guy that played Blazing Saddles. I forget his name. Mel
Uh,
Brooks.
Mel
Mel
Brooks,
Brooks
yes, there we go.
very
Got
good at
Mel Brooks.
because like a lot of his movies were parodies, and that was his point is doing a parody of a genre, and I think he did a very good job with the movies that he did do.
Yeah,
Spaceballs. My
Baseballs is good.
favorite fucking parody of all time has got to be Spaceballs. I love that movie.
So that's a
Robin
really
Hood Men in
great.
Tights is up
Yeah,
there too, though.
Robin Hood
Yes,
Men in Tights
I
is
was
up
thinking Men
there.
in Tights also.
Yeah, and that's an interesting kind of segue into the next thing, and this is kind of a thought-provoking thing, because when we think about pop culture and how we kind of look at influence, now it's kind of time to think about how things are adapted. And adaptation is one of those things that people kind of don't like to talk about because they think adaptation is bad because things have to be original. But again, nothing is created in a vacuum. So I'm going to remind you that without samurai films, we don't get Star Wars, but also without Hamlet, we don't get 1995's Lion King. So that's the other part of it. So it's the idea of the question here is going to be what is your favorite kind of update story? For me, as a kid, obviously The Little Mermaid, going from the Hans Christian Andersen one where she doesn't survive to Jodie Benson as Ariel and Pat Carroll as Ursula. That was a very formative one for me. But you could also look at the update of Alice in Wonderland that Disney did, and then look at something like American McGee's Alice in Wonderland, where it goes into this like dystopian mental health much more graphic and violent sort of headspace. You could look at Wizard of Oz, into The Wiz, into Wicked the book, Wicked the stage play, Wicked the upcoming movie, um, or one of my favorite sci-fi series from like the late 80s, early 90s, the Deathstalker series, where they took every single possible sci-fi convention and stuffed them all into one like 7-book series. And it's garbage, but it's my garbage, and I absolutely love it. If Simon Green ends up watching this, I still think they're great books, and I'm glad you published them. But they were just all of the tropes of sci-fi just stuffed into one thing, which I'm not mad about. One of my favorite genre films is a film like The Fifth Element too, which has that kind of multi-trope, almost expected thing, but they pull it off, and it's amazing how they pull it off. So, kind of, what are your celebrations of things that are adaptations or like part of a genre? What kind of thing would you like to celebrate? And you can celebrate more Mel Brooks. I'm not going to stop you. Celebrate Mel Brooks all you want to.
Okay. So personally, I love every single Alice in Wonderland adaptation I have ever seen. The Alice Madness Returns. I played a bit of that. But my absolute favorite was a sci-fi miniseries.
The
It
Alice
was
sci-fi
the
miniseries with
Alice
Kathy
sci-fi.
Bates, with
Yes,
with the blonde Jack, and the yeah, I talk about that all the time
yes.
because that
Oh, I
was the
love that
same
one
year they
so much.
did. That was a year before after they did their Tin Man with Neil McDonough and Zoe Deschanel and Alan Cumming as the Scarecrow and Richard Dreyfuss as the opium drenched wizard. I absolutely adore Tin Man, and not enough people have seen it. We just recorded an episode on my podcast about Return to Oz, and I think Return to Oz is one of the best, weirdest, most striking dark fantasy kids movies in all of existence. But yeah, no, the sci-fi Alice is really good.
Oh,
Um, Disney has done a whole bunch of books that have updated villain stories, and there is one for the Queen, for the Red Queen. I can't remember what it's called. There was also a series of Alice in Wonderland books done in the vein of Wicked, and I think they're called Seeing Red or Turning Red or something. I don't know if you've ever read them, but
mm.
I remember reading one, and it was a very provocative idea of trying to answer the question of if Wonderland is in Alice's imagination or if it's actually just a place like a pocket dimension she goes to. And I think it's the closest book to ever circle that answer to a question maybe nobody has a good answer to. Um, I can't. It's called Seeing Red or Turning Red. One of the books has the word red in the title. Lord knows if I can remember the author. It'll bug me all night.
So
And Zhang Pao, if your answer is Farscape or Babylon 5, I think you'll score some points with me, if not the whole audience, because those are both amazing sci-fi series.
well, actually, I was actually thinking about Torchwood because when they said that they were going to take Captain Jack and then make his own series, I was just like, would that work? Because wow, he's an amazing character, and the actor, I can't remember his name now. He's an
John
amazing,
Barrowman.
yes, and he's an amazing actor. Like he is Jack, you know. So
Oh yeah.
when they said that they were gonna have a series focused around him, I was like, but will that work? And then you start watching Torchwood, it's like it works because he
Yes.
he he he, he stays in character. It's not really Torchwood. While Torchwood is actually an Earth solution to the outer space, Torchwood the series is more about the people. It's about Jack and how he deals with his team with the creature of the week, and it was just like it was a great thing to watch. I looked forward to watching that show along with watching Doctor Who because they both went hand in hand.
And then they produced a whole bunch of books for the Torchwood series before the Children of Earth uh, season series 3. So there's even a really delightful set of books to go with them that I think are really neat.
I think the other thing I was actually thinking about was it's a series of books, and they are from the extended universe of Star Wars, and they're called the Tales from series. And I often make the mistake of saying it's by Kevin J. Anderson, but it's not by Kevin J. Anderson. It's edited by Kevin J. Anderson. And the idea is there's different authors that tell the story of different things that are going on in the Star Wars universe. And one of the stories is actually about the Rancor Keeper. Like in Return of the Jedi, you see the Rancor Keeper, and you tell his story, and you realize and you learn why why he's crying that Luke Skywalker has killed the Rancor, because we all remember that he's crying, oh no, you killed him, and we kind of thought that was kind of funny. But then you read the story about who this guy is and why he cares about this thing, and I finished reading it, and all of a sudden I was like, Luke, you're an asshole. Why did you kill the Rancor? Why would you do such? If you say you're a good person, why would you kill a person's pet? You're a bad person. You should feel bad for killing a person's pet. So I often tell people you need to watch or you need to read the Tales from series edited by Kevin J. Anderson, because the stories in those are just so great. I love them.
Fabulous. I do have a couple of extended universe Star Wars novels I really like myself. One of them surrounds Princess Leia, and she talks about her choice to practice diplomacy instead of becoming a Jedi. Um, and I think for me, that's a very remarkable book, and I was very sad when they said those books don't quote unquote matter when they were
Yeah.
doing the sequel trilogy. I was personally offended by that. But that is neither here nor there. I'm not going to bring up the grievance because we will get very sidetracked. And I have two questions. We have two more questions. It is now we have 30 minutes left, and I want to see if we can do them both.
I
So the
found the
first,
name of this series, John.
oh, was it the series I was trying to remember, or was it?
Yes, I believe. The Looking Glass Wars by Frank Bador. Book 2 is Seeing Red with 2 Ds.
Oh yeah, no, that's right. I was always bothered by the extra D on seeing red. I know why, but it still
Because
bothers
it's a
me as a
name.
human. I know it's a name, but it's still wrong.
And by the
Uh,
way, thank you, John, because I'm going to get those books.
you're welcome for all of the free time that you currently have for the extra reading time. All
Yeah.
right. So there's two questions left. The first question I want to talk about, and I'm not really sure what this question is, but I was thinking about the idea of bending genre, of using influence to tell a story in an unexpected way. The best example I have for this right now is the Five Nights at Freddy's series, specifically because my version of dystopia is that weird, clean utopia, Twilight Zone, Logan's Run sort of thing, instead of Demolition Man, where everything is like really gross and dirty. I go for utopian dystopia, where it looks clean, but it's awful under the surface. So when I think about genre bending, I think about Five Nights at Freddy's, specifically the new one that's the really buggy video game. But generally speaking, Five Nights at Freddy's is about the idea of that deep fear we have about the animatronics at Chuck E. Cheese taken to an extreme. And it's kind of like a robot Blade Runner, but it's not. And it's also a sci fi series set in the past, the nostalgia of something like The Last Starfighter, but it's not. And so, do you have anything that you think of that you consider genre bending as as kind of a thing that you like, or that you absolutely hate and you want people to avoid like the plague? But when you think when I say genre bending, do you think of those pictures of someone did a picture of Disney princesses as detectives, like they had like a Snow White femme fatale that was really cool. That's also genre bending, but to like Disney princesses as cement mixers. It's a very poor genre bend, but it is it. It's a genre bend. Mary Kate and Ashley, when they did those movies when they were younger, going into witness protection, those are really great examples of cute genre bending. Um,
I know that when I was in film school, there was actually a class. It was because I was never really a big fan of the horror genre because I was scared, and so
no, some of them are scary. I understand. Yes, no, I understand how scary some of them can be. I love Vincent Price, but there's a scene. There's like two scenes in Theater of Blood where I'm like, no, thank you. I'm out. Peace.
just to tell you just how scary I am. When I watched Return of the Jedi as a little kid, like 5 or 10 or whatever, and the Rancor scene scared the shit out of me. Like it scared me so much. I could not watch that scene until I was like 13 or 15 years old. So that should show you just how scared I am.
No,
And
I've never watched the Neverending Story movies because I watched them once when I was a kid, and in one of the sequels, they have a machine that takes away your memories when you're wishing, and it doesn't. You don't know you're losing memories, and like I've never been able to watch that movie again because that memory stealing machine makes me give me so much anxiety. Like never, I don't think I've ever sat through a whole Neverending Story movie because they're too much for me. So no, I totally get it.
so and there was throughout the years I have been trying to get over my fears. And so there was this when they the thing of there was a class on the history of the horror genre. And so I was thinking, you know what? I'm going to get over my prejudice, my fear, my whatever it is that you want to call it, of the horror genre, and actually learn about this. Find out where did it start from,
Yeah.
and how did it begin. And part of the class, the last hour and a half, 2 hours, was to actually watch a horror film, and the film would tie into what the class was about. And I think one of the ones that we watched towards the end, it was talking about the future of the horror genre, and can the horror genre still be relevant since it's been so saturated. And so
I
when
mean, I think all the Jordan Peele movies would answer that question with yes. Yes, it can. And yes, it does.
well, actually, the question was yes because of Cabin in the Woods. Because in Cabin in the Woods, what they have done, and they had taken the traditional horror movie and they turned it on its head.
Yeah.
And then throughout like the first part of the movie is just your typical slasher film. And this is how works. And then they find out that there's a cabin in the woods that you have to go over there to find out what the big bad killer. And then you realize that it's not a big bad killer. It's actually all been orchestrated by this big corporation, and they have been. The idea is that every single horror movie that's ever been made has been made by this large corporation. They change, like, why do the kids go to the basement to go away from the to the killer when they can go out the door? Well, the idea is that this company has been tricking these kids into going into the horror basement so that they can get a better movie. And I was just like, wow, that's an amazing thing. But then during the movie, they flip it all around again and say, hey, you know what? Now there is a big horror killer inside the big bad company, and now it's more of a gore thing. It's no longer a slasher flick. Now it's a gore, scare porn or gore porn, so that everybody getting stabbed, everybody getting killed in horrific ways. And I still remember, I'll probably always remember that one guy got killed when a unicorn stabbed him, and I was just like, yes, do that, unicorn, you kill that guy. I was just
Uh,
like,
that is a great example of genre bending with purpose. It's a hard movie to love because it's a movie from Joss Whedon. So for me, that's like it's a little bit harder to grapple with. But as for the purpose of genre bending as a conversation, that worked for me. Along with in a different way, the 2002 live action Scooby Doo movie, I think, is a perfect example of updating a genre, not necessarily bending it, but at least updating it. I'm a big live action Scooby Doo fan for that reason.
Oh,
Um,
those movies were so perfectly casted. It's just
Yeah.
ridiculous.
I mean, of course, the Fred and Daphne of that universe are married, of course.
Well, yeah.
And Linda Cardellini is such a great actress, and poor Matthew Lillard. After he'd finished those movies, they made him stop voicing Shaggy, and he'd been doing that for forever. Um,
But
poor Matthew, but
why?
Matthew Lillard's doing okay for himself. Anyways, so Ava, genre bending stuff. I heard you furiously typing, and I think you looked at your bookshelf. So I'm hoping you have something to offer for genre bending.
What the the furious typing was me defending Ed and Eddie in the comments on Twitch.
I mean, does someone think something is wrong with Ed, and Eddie? Because they're wrong. It's a great little show. It's not Courage the Cowardly Dog, but it doesn't have to be. That can be. So when we have a week where we talk about the idea of what slice of life is. Ed, and Eddie is a perfect example, not of a sitcom, but of a slice of life cartoon where things have to reset, where there are certain tropes you have to meet. The last season is harder to defend because it takes them out of that perpetual summer cul-de-sac feel and
But
puts them
I
in
liked the
school.
last season. It felt like it was a really nice way of ending it because there's really no other way to end that type of series other than to have change.
Yeah,
Because
I don't think it's
otherwise
bad.
there is no end. I loved the end.
Yeah,
I
I
loved the
don't think
last
it's
season.
bad. It's just it is a different kind of finale season. It is
Mm.
different than Courage, where Courage felt like it ended at about three different points, depending upon who you ask. It's a different feel from Rugrats and Rugrats All Grown Up, which I actually think is a pretty good series on its own merit. But yeah, so is like your is Ed and Eddie your genre bending thing? Because in a way, it did bend genre, even for a slice of life, and it led to things like Total Drama Island and things like that. So Ed and
I
Eddie
couldn't
does have
stand
a
total
place.
drama anything.
Well, that's okay. I still like you anyways, but
I think I've watched one of the early ones, but I don't know. I couldn't get into it. Anyway,
it's not
um
well paced. It's really not.
genre is so nebulously defined in that it's not at all actually, it's just kind of common agreement that so
And it cycles every 20 years. Every 20 years,
yeah.
the genre changes.
And so I don't even think about like genre bending. So and like what was described with Cabin in the Woods, I wouldn't consider that genre bending. It's more a um I can't think of the actual phrase, but it's like a reversal of expectations because you expect it to go one way, and then about the midway point, everything gets flipped on its head, and but it's makes
So for
sense.
you, it would be closer to like a parody like Hellfest, where it starts out as one thing and you think you're getting one thing, but it becomes something different. So for people that haven't seen it, Hellfest is this movie about a corporation holding this really great horror convention on an island, but then all the things in your nightmares in the movies are real. And it's about a young man that the guy that played Peter Pan on the Once Upon a Time live action series. I can't remember his name, Robbie something. I think his name is, but he plays the hero of this, and it's all about him both learning to accept and mature from these, but also his family is are all horror buffs, and they're all angry at horror movies for different reasons. It's an interesting. You have to see Hellfest, but it's so genre bending.
So I
I
think
will
less
I will make it more
parody.
personal. Yeah, I will make it more personal for you. If you think of something in, let's say, World Within a World or in high fantasy, your choice, that subverted your expectations, that really made you think. what would you say for that? Like, we're back a dinosaur story. You've never seen a dark circus before, or something like that.
Right. The first one that comes to mind, and it's probably because I've listened to Brandon Sanderson's lectures. They record his um lectures at BYU and post them on the internet. And so obviously he uses his own work as examples a lot. And this is going to spoil the first Mistborn trilogy kind of, but so with a fantasy, and hell, there's even a prophecy in that series. And so the prophecy is read, everybody assumes, and even the reader assumes, that this person is the one meant to fulfill that prophecy. And then they die. They're not the one that fulfills that prophecy.
Bummer for
And
them,
somebody
though.
else does.
Bummer
And
for...
so that was a really good, but it still fit the tone, it fit the book, it didn't take me out of it. And so with subverting expectations, this is turning into a fucking lecture anyway, but you have to be careful with subverting expectations because you can do it wrong. If you start off with a high fantasy and then 3/4 of the way through the book, it's like a smash cut into a wall, and you get some sci-fi or something completely different. It's hard because the people who came for fantasy will be pissed off because you changed it. It's no longer fantasy. That's not what I wanted. But the people who would have appreciated that won't make it to that point. And so it's really nice to see it done well.
Okay. We have one more question left, and then I'll let people plug whatever they want to plug before we head out for the evening. I want to thank everyone for joining us. The final question of the night is, besides for the World Builder's Guide that you're currently reading as part of your inspiration, who is that by again? The Planet
Mark Rosenfelder. He's also the guy that writes the language construction books that I'm reading. The language construction kit and the advanced language construction kit. I think, yeah.
Now, besides that, and besides my reference earlier to EF's Visit to a Small Planet or Guide to a Small Planet, the PDF, whose I can never remember, by Eleanor Fuchs, I have a few ones that are influential on my writing process. I want to know what specific writing books have been influential in your writing process.
Just long enough.
I took some writing classes when I was in the film class, but I haven't really read books about writing. I've just written, like, ideas come to my head, and then all of a sudden the scenes come into my head and dialogue comes into my head. And one of the classes that I took was a screenwriting class, and so we had to do this whole script. And so I wrote the script for my story, and I turned it in. And well, actually, we had to read it in front of the class. So I'm reading the thing. We actually we could have people read lines for the characters, and then we read the direction. And one thing that the teacher told me was that he loved my story. He loved the direction that I had, the description of what everything would be doing. The only thing he didn't like was the dialogue. He said that my dialogue was very much, how was it? He said, dialogue you would hear in a kung fu movie, like in one of those old 70s kung fu movies. And I was just like, okay. I mean, I did grow up with that. So I was just like, maybe I should be reading something to learn how to write in dialogue, because supposedly everything else I can do. great, but I need
Oh,
help with dialogue.
yeah. I mean, and everyone that could also be your writing style in dialogue. Teachers are notorious for not enjoying individual writing styles necessarily just because of the nature of the time that they have in class. But yeah, so Ava, do you have any, or should I do mine while you drink your soda pop?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
So the big one that I actually need to buy a new copy of because dog destroyed it at some point was Stephen King's On Writing,
Hmm.
which is where I first
I don't agree with everything he says in
oh
that, but
no, definitely not.
it is a really great primer for learning how to write.
Yeah,
Or
and
even
he's
if you just want to find out about Stephen King's
mm,
process for his like autobiographically speaking.
yes, no, I some of the stories he tells about like his early childhood stuck with me for some reason, and I don't know why, but I love them. Um, maybe he just has that much of an engaging writing style, you know. But so that was a big one. And so, by the way, I don't remember half of the books that I have read because when I was young, I knew exactly where that reference section was in my public library. I knew exactly where all the writing books were. And I would constantly be at that small little section that was the reference
Are,
materials.
are you sure Casera's not based on Matilda from the Roald Dahl book Matilda? Just
Might be a
without the
little bit of that too. I
portmanteau?
think it was just mostly me. Um, Another one that I need to replace because I lent to a friend and it never came back to me, was actually it's called No Plot, No Problem. And I cannot remember the author's name, but it's the guy that created NaNoWriMo.
Oh,
Which
I love
is
NaNoWriMo. It's great.
Rimo.
So No Plot, No Problem is by Chris Beatty. Chris Batty? I don't know how to say his
80, I
name.
think it is. But
Beatty.
anyway, so that one's also really nice. I used to read it every October right before November.
That's a
um
very proper thing to do, yeah.
yeah, so that one was always nice because it didn't care about structure. It was more about getting you just writing. It
Yeah.
wasn't about writing structure or plot or anything. It was basically just in permission to write crap, just so long as you were writing.
Which is
Um,
sometimes a permission you need to give yourself in order to
oh
get
yes,
anything done. Just put it on
definitely yes.
paper. Worry about it
Re-
later.
One that I so Save the Cat writes a novel,
Oh, you're doing
and
Save the
I'm
Cat.
sure, yes,
Yeah.
I knew you would know
I
exactly what
actually
that
follow
is.
him on Instagram. The guy that does Save the Cat has an Instagram
Like Snyder,
page
yeah.
I follow. Yeah.
So Jessica Brody took that and specifically wrote a book um for those who write novels.
Yeah. His uh
And
his Facebook Save the Cat, they do like a beat sheet where they actually go through movies and they dismantle
yeah,
them, which is really nice.
they've got at least one of those for each of the different I forget what the phrase it is because it's not genres. Is it
Uh,
genre?
di- no, it's not genre. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So like
Well,
they
no.
have one
Okay,
for
so it's
film, they have one for TV, they have one for
no. It's actually different than that. So that she does refer to them as genres, but it's more. It's not like the bookshelf genre. So there's the why done it, which are like detectives, deceptions. The Fool Triumphant, which is the victory of the underdog. Buddy love, I love. Um, and so let's just flip to one real quick. Like the why done it. That's the first one that I just came to. So the ones she uses as examples are, let's see, Memory Man by David Baldacci, In the Woods by Tana French, and Then There Were None by Agatha Christie,
that's a
and
great
The
one.
Girl on the Train.
I would also add
So
to that list Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross if you want to do a why done it, but you want to do like a mobster, um, which is probably one of the best written mobster movies ever made was Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross.
yeah, and so it's not a bookshelf genre. It's more the type of story. So like for a why done it, you need a detective, a secret, and then the dark turn.
Yeah.
And so you got a girl with the dragon tattoo, Gone Girl. Let's see.
Promising Young Woman would probably fit into that. A Promising Young Woman it's a hard movie to watch. The ending is really difficult. But yeah, Promising Young Woman would probably fit that. We got a couple minutes left. I'm gonna do mine just so that we can get through this. So that I wrote down, my first one is Bird by Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, which is so Anne Lamott is this great writer who wrote a whole bunch of like life short stories. But Bird by Bird by Bird is about her as a writing instructor talking about the writing process and about the idea of your novel as stepping stones and about the idea of even if you make it, what does that mean for you? So the idea of what does it mean to be a writer? Will you be fulfilled if you're never successful? Is it something that you're doing because you have to, or that you're drawn to? So Bird by Bird by Bird, if you're looking for kind of like not a religious version of writing, but like one that looks at the process in a very intimate way. Bird by Bird is really great. It has a great cover too. It has like a red side panel that I absolutely love. I also picked up Consider This, which is Chuck Palahniuk's guide to writing, where it basically feels like he's talking about the process of writing Fight Club and how it tore him to shreds, but in that very self-effacing way. I'm lucky to live. Style. I'm lucky to live where he comes and he signs stuff in different bookstores around me every now and then. He choked me once for a photograph. It was great. It was everything I wanted. I didn't have the courage to tell him I didn't want to be choked out, and he was choking out everybody else. So I was like, sure, why not? But Consider This is probably one of the best self-facing books. It's right up there with Augustine Burroughs' Running with Scissors, which is kind of the precursor to Augustine writing. It got made into a movie that not many people saw because they thought it was the Addams Family, but it's completely different. Augustine Burroughs, if you really want to do a lot of writing that's more camp or more overtly queer or more overtly strange, I recommend Augustine quite a bit. I'd also recommend there's a really great graphic novel renaissance, not just because of Sandman on Netflix, but like Steve Orlando's Midnighter series that led into his kind of working with revamping the X-Men and Krakoa. There's a lot of really great graphic novel comic book writers out now, and you shouldn't be afraid, even if you're not going to write comic books, to look at how they set up panels, how they tell the story both with dialogue but with visuals, because even if you're doing a book, you want to look at the idea of how is someone going to see it in their brain. That was part of my problems with the Harry Potter movies, was because I had this very grand scope, and the Harry Potter movies gradually became more claustrophobic and literally darker. So even before all the problems with Rowling, the movies themselves couldn't live up to the book expectations I had in my head. So I always recommend finding 2 or 3 that you love. I also recommend looking at drag artists. So I talk about, especially around Halloween, I love the Boulet brothers. And drag is a great way to look at genre and about expectation in shorthand visually. If you like things like Top Chef or Nailed It, you also get a little bit of that, but drag does it on an art level where you get your expectation, but it also twists it and bends it into something new. And I really like that for my work and for just art in general. But yeah, On Writing is great. Consider This.
I have one more that I just thought. It's not a book, and it tends to be pretty high level just because they're 15 minutes. But the podcast that Brandon Sanderson does, you reminded me of it when you were talking about comics, because he's got a web comic on the panel. Brandon Sanderson's Writing Excuses podcast.
Yeah, there are some great. If you want to learn how to write for podcasts or write in dialogue specifically, both TED Talks tend to be available online, but more importantly, there's a website called The Moth, which is people that aren't traditional storytellers, that they give their stories to someone that makes it into a story that they tell, and then they record them actually like giving. It's not called a moth talk. I don't know what it's called. It's called the Moth, and it's about non-traditional storytellers telling stories. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. That's what TTRPGs are about for me. Is that yes, we're rolling dice and having adventure, but at the end of the day, it's telling a story communally, which is really cool. Even when you're Panabon and you just want to go out and stab people, you're still having a good time. So we have 3 minutes left, and I want to be able to respect everyone's time. I want to thank y'all for hanging out with us on the second Friday, which is coming up on the 14th. We will be having trivia night again, and that trivia night will be animation themed. I'm not going to clarify more than that, just to know that if you love animation, you have a chance to win some points and level up. See if you can beat Chris's score of 35 from dominating from the 90s trivia night. I heard Xangpow say something. What was that?
All I was saying is Chris can't play. He's too good.
I mean, he might not be as good at animation. You don't know, but come in and see if you can beat Chris's score. He's the current champion with 35 points. He's very close to level 2, which starts at 50 points, where he will get a spell. I could put a spell on you. Does anyone have anything they'd like to plug before we head out?
Yes.
My gay visual novel is an alpha test, so I will not plug that this time, but I will plug it later, and my podcast, such I talk about all the time. Ava, go ahead and plug whatever you have to plug.
Well, everybody needs to go over and back the Gelatinous Cube Kickstarter. You get Gelatinous Cube soaps. They jiggle. They're like basically the consistency of Jell-O, but they're soap. Each one has dice suspended within it that you will release as you use it. If you go to remalternus.com/soap, I believe we have 6 days left in the campaign. So we're getting very close to the end. Maybe I'm pretty sure it's 6.
Something
but
like
we almost released. We've almost unlocked the blood ooze. So we've unlocked the green was the start. We unlocked the clear blue, the classic gelatinous cube, the black pudding, and now the next one is the blood ooze. And after that is a purple one, and I want the purple, so bag it.
All right. Yep, and we have Shadowrun Edge Zone, the card game, which I think is fully back now, so it's like getting all the stretch goals.
400% fun, 700% funded, or something like that.
Amazing. Yeah, and that's going to be
$20,000 right now.
I didn't quite catch that, but it's a very high number, which is the important thing.
70,000.
70,000
out of the $10,000 goal.
Nice. I hope that I can do that someday for one of my projects.
No
thank you everyone for tuning in. Rem Chats has a variety of streams throughout the week. There is no Descent into Avernus. They are on a little vacation from the end of their season. They will be back on Saturday morning. So our next big stream, if we don't do Goose Goose Duck tomorrow night, will be Sunday night, which is like clockwork. Monday is Paranormal Albany. Shadowrun Chicago Missions is on a bit of a break, but Denver is next Wednesday. And then Thursday is Gen Con TV, and I don't know what it is yet, but there will be a Rules of Cool interview at 4 p.m. Pacific time, and then stick around for whatever's happening on Emerald Glitch in the fallout of Billy Berserker. Thank you for joining us and going berserk tonight. This has been Rem Chats, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
I'm waving. You can't see it, but I'm waving.